The California Gold Rush, 1849. The morning at the sawmill was cool and quiet. Water from the mill race slid over pale stones and into a wooden trough. A carpenter named James Marshall bent to study the sand where the current slowed. Something bright winked in the mix. He pinched it, pressed it gently with his teeth, and felt the softness of a metal that did not give up its color to the water. He showed it to others at the mill. They weighed it in their hands, and a simple word formed: gold. The year was 1848. News left the hillside slowly at first, riding by letter and rumor, then caught wind and spread. By spring of 1849, the word had crossed oceans. Crowds began to move. Farmers folded their fields into memory and stepped onto roads. Sailors traded decks for dirt paths that followed river bends. Clerks closed ledgers, wrapped a few shirts and a blanket, and joined wagon trains that creaked toward the setting sun. Some travelers were boys with clear eyes and quick laughs. Some were older men who walked with care but held steady hope. A few women set out too, some to mine, and many to cook, wash, mend, and run boarding houses that would hold entire streets together. People followed three main routes. Some boarded ships that rounded the stormy tip of South America, a long arc that tested patience. Some sailed to Panama, crossed the narrow isthmus by canoe, mule, and foot, then took another ship up the Pacific. Others trusted wagons and strong animals, crossed the plains, drank from muddy rivers, watched the sky, and learned the shapes of the mountains ahead. Arriving in California felt like stepping into a story already in motion. Hills rolled with pale grasses. Stands of oak and pine gave shade to cold, fast streams. A miner's first lesson was simple: learn the pan. He found a quiet eddy and scooped a mix of gravel, sand, and water into a shallow metal bowl. He crouched and moved the pan in slow circles, letting the lighter sand slip over the rim. When the swirl cleared, he checked the bottom for a warm glimmer that would not float away. The second lesson was the rocker box, the cradle which let one person wash more material with the same steady rhythm. Soon came the sluice, a long trough lined with riffles to catch heavy particles. Each new tool widened the day's work, but the motion stayed calm and repeated, like breathing. Camps rose where the color showed. At first there were a handful of tents around a shared fire. Then came rough cabins made from saplings and canvas roofs. Streets took shape and earned names painted on cracked boards: Hangtown, Rough, and Ready, Placerville, Sonora, Nevada City. Stores sold shovels and picks, boots and candles, coffee and beans. Prices swelled with distance and weather. A pair of boots that cost $3 back east could fetch $20 in the hills. An egg could feel like a feast. Still, the bustle had its own order. Men lined up for flour. Teamsters shouted to clear a path for wagons. Someone always knew who sharpened saws fastest or who kept the freshest bread. Not everyone hunted metal in the stream bed. Many people saw that miners with dust in their pouches needed everything else. Blacksmiths built forges and mended tools. Carpenters framed bridges and warehouses. Teamsters hauled barrels and bundles from the port. Tailors stitched sturdy work pants. Washhouses boiled shirts in iron kettles and pinned them to lines that fluttered like flags. Cooks opened lunch counters and served stews that could fill a stomach and calm a street. Steady work built steady money. Some of the best fortunes came from these simple, dependable trades. San Francisco changed faster than anyone could have predicted. In 1848 it was a small port with low buildings and a few hundred residents. Within 2 years ships from every compass point crowded the harbor. Some crews rushed to the hills and never returned. Abandoned ships were turned into storage, saloons, even hotels. Streets were laid on drifting sand. Newspapers announced new strikes and false leads, arrivals and departures. Fires, driven by wind, swept the growing town more than once. Each time carpenters rebuilt with the same determined energy. The town's rhythm became quick steps and faster talk, but behind the speed stood basic things: lumber stacked straight, barrels rolled into neat rows, tools oiled and set in order. The trip inland was short and steep. A person could leave a noisy wharf in the morning and by afternoon hear only wind in the tall grass and water in the pines. The Sierra foothills held manzanita, live oak, and clear streams that ran bright after rain and brown after heavy work. Claims were staked by camp rules, some written and tacked to a tree, others spoken and remembered. A miner marked his ground, worked it within a set time, and respected his neighbor's line. If a dispute rose, the camp gathered. A few walked the ground, measured a rope's length, listened, and agreed on a simple decision. The goal was not fancy justice but quick fairness that kept hands at work. People came from every direction. Spanish rang in the air from men of Sonora, Chile, and Peru. Cantonese carried over the clink of shovels as Chinese miners worked with steady patience along the waterline. Irish songs and fiddles filled the evening when a day had gone well. French jokes drew laughter near the fire. Germans brewed small barrels for a festival when the weather softened. Sometimes the mix led to cooperation and trade. Sometimes, when gold was scarce, it led to jealousy and harsh words. Some local rules and taxes targeted foreign miners and pushed them aside. These rules did harm, and the record holds both the kindness and the unfairness of those years. For native peoples of California, the rush brought sudden, damaging change. Villages stood near the same rivers where miners now crowded. Game grew scarce as more mouths needed meat. Rivers turned muddy from constant digging. Some miners, hungry and careless, took fish, acorns, and stored food from places that had supported families for generations. Disease moved with the camps and struck communities that had no protection against it. Violence rose, and the law did not always protect native families. Some communities moved into hills to survive. Others stayed and endured. The story of the gold rush includes this loss, and it is part of the truth that must be told clearly and calmly. As the first easy bars were worked out, methods grew larger. Companies built flumes that hugged hillsides and carried water to dry ravines. Men with long pry bars rolled boulders that one person could never move alone. Later, high-pressure hoses blasted entire hills into sluices, a method called hydraulic mining. The jets hissed and bit into earth with a force that seemed to borrow strength from the mountains. Gold came out of the wash, but so did tons of mud and gravel that drifted downstream and settled in fields. Farmers in the valleys found their orchards and ditches buried. Arguments grew about rights to land, water, and the space between. In time, courts limited hydraulic work to protect farms, but damage had already been done. The land holds those scars even when grass covers them. The rhythm of a miner's day was plain. He rose in the gray light, boiled coffee, and ate what he had: hardtack, beans, or a slice of cured pork. He walked to his claim with a shovel on his shoulder. He washed gravel, pried roots, shifted rocks, and watched the bottom of the pan. At noon he rested in a patch of shade. In the afternoon he worked again until the light fell behind the ridge. His hands cracked. His back ached. Some evenings he weighed a small pile of flakes and felt his hope rise. Other nights he counted nothing at all and said little until morning. Letters were a lifeline between hills and home. Paper was scarce, but men saved scraps and wrote by candlelight. They told of cold streams, high prices, and the rumor of a richer bar just a little farther upstream. They asked after parents, wives, and children. They promised to return when they had made a stake. Some kept that promise within a year. Others found that time in the hills stretched. A plan for a season became a second winter and then a third spring. Express companies carried these letters down the mountain, onto ships, and across the country. A week when no mail arrived felt longer than it should. A week with a letter felt shorter. Women shaped camps and towns in practical ways. Some ran boarding houses where a miner could find a clean bed and a hot meal. Some washed clothes in cold water and charged by the shirt and the pair of trousers. Some baked pies and carried them in baskets from camp to camp. Their arrival lifted the mood on a whole street. A few worked claims with partners and kept pace beside the water. Children appeared as families formed. The sound of play changed a camp's tone, a pebble game here, a rope game there, a small laugh that softened the evening. Banks and express companies helped make sense of the dust. Gold flakes are hard to weigh fairly in a crowded room where scales can be rigged and fingers can be quick. Firms offered to carry gold from camp to town and from town to ship. A miner could trade dust for a written receipt and use that paper to buy supplies or send value to family back east. Honest weights and safe delivery turned a row of tents into an economy. Sturdy companies grew from this simple promise: what you hand us will reach where it is supposed to go. The seasons wrote their own calendar. Spring snowmelt filled streams and made washing easier but colder. Summer heat dried shallow creeks and pushed miners to dig deeper into old beds. Autumn brought steadier weather and more supplies along improved roads. Winter storms turned tracks to thick clay. Some camps emptied until March, while others stayed and worked the banks the water left exposed. In the darkest months men told longer stories to make the hours pass. They repaired tools, patched tents, and planned where they would move when the roads hardened. Few struck great riches, but many learned to measure success in quieter ways. Some gathered enough to buy a small farm in the Central Valley and felt a different kind of wealth when a field turned green. Others saved a stake to open a store in a growing town. Many simply went home with a little money and the knowledge that they had met hard work every day and kept their courage. The most consistent gains often came to those who mixed mining with dependable work, running a ferry, cutting timber, hauling freight, or feeding hungry men at a fair price. California's rush helped speed statehood. Debates over slavery, already hot in the nation, arrived with the crowds. In 1850 California entered the Union as a free state. The decision did not end the nation's arguments, but it set the state's course. In mining camps the question showed up at tables and in tents. Old loyalties met new voices. People listened, answered, and sometimes changed their minds. The hills became another place where the country's larger debates took root. Law and order grew from habit before it grew from books. When a theft occurred, men gathered, heard both sides, and voted on what seemed fair. When a fight broke out, bystanders stepped in and made the angry sleep off the heat. When a claim line was in dispute, a small committee walked the ground, measured a rope's length, and tried to settle the matter. In towns, formal courts opened and sheriffs were hired, but the habit of local judgment remained. People who had lived for months by rules they made together did not forget how to use their voices to keep a street steady. The rush also changed the land. Trees near rivers were cut for shoring and cabins. Hillsides were scraped bare where gravels were rich. Rivers shifted their beds under the weight of silt and stone. Salmon runs thinned where debris buried spawning grounds. None of it was planned as a whole. Thousands of small actions made one large change. Years later, when orchards replaced diggings and rail lines crossed the valleys, people still found old timbers and rusted iron in creeks after heavy rain. The past did not vanish. It rested just underfoot. Chinese miners faced particular challenges and built strong communities in response. Many arrived after long voyages and formed companies that shared costs and profits. They cooked together, pooled savings, and worked with steady care along banks that others had abandoned too soon. Some neighbors welcomed them. Others passed local taxes and rules designed to push them away. In some places, violence forced them from claims they had worked by the same rules as everyone else. Even so, Chinese merchants, gardeners, and craftsmen helped shape towns from the coast to the foothills. Their temples and shops became part of the lasting fabric of California life. The gold near the surface did not last forever. As easy pickings faded, many miners sold their tools and left. Others stayed as wage workers in larger operations that needed steady hands more than luck. The West changed with them. Stage roads improved, then telegraph wires crossed the passes. A miner could hear of a new strike in Nevada or Idaho and decide within a day whether to go. What began as a wild chase narrowed into a network of towns, ranches, mills, and markets. The rush settled into a broader economy where gold mattered, but so did wheat, cattle, timber, and trade. Quiet moments still threaded through the noise. At dusk a man might sit by his tent and watch swallows skim the water. He would hold a letter and read it twice. He would think of a porch far away, a maple-lined road, a name he had not said aloud in months. He might tuck a small nugget into the corner of the paper and fold it carefully, a token to send with the next express. He might tell himself, one more season, and believe it, no matter how the next months turned. Women guided towns toward steadier lives. They asked for schools and helped build them. They formed aid societies to support widows and orphans. They organized fairs to raise money for bridges and meeting halls. Some ran newspapers and wrote firm letters that shaped local debates. Some stood up in meetings when a decision would shape their street. In a place that could be rough, they offered a different evening light, a church supper, a reading circle, a few songs at a square piano. A town with a school, a bakery, and a good well felt more secure than any strike. As the 1850s passed, mining looked more like an industry. Dams exposed riverbeds. Tunnels reached into hills. Shareholders expected ledgers and reports. The small chance of a sudden find gave way to wages and schedules. Some felt the loss of romance. Others felt relief at a regular payday. California settled into a broader rhythm where ships, wagons, and rails carried more than picks and pans. Ports grew busier. Trails became roads, then stage routes, then tracks for iron wheels that ran on a fixed time. What did people carry home when their time in the diggings ended? A few carried great wealth. Many carried enough to start again with better tools. All carried the knowledge of how fast a place can change and how much patient work it takes to build anything that lasts. They learned that luck matters, but discipline usually matters more. They learned to read a river and to read a face. They learned that people from different countries can share a fire and a pot when the day is cold. They learned that crowds can be noisy and still hold a quiet kindness. The gold rush also changed the way people thought about distance. Before it, California felt like the far edge of the world to many Americans. After it, the nation's map felt smaller. Paths had been walked, passes had been found and named. Letters traveled faster than before. News of births and losses reached people on either coast within weeks instead of months. Far away shifted for everyone who watched the rush, even those who never left home. If you picture one camp late at night, you can see the small, human things that made the big story. A man dries his socks by a low flame. Another taps mud from his shovel and props it by the door. Someone stirs beans and saves a strip of bacon for tomorrow. A dog circles 3 times and lies down with a long sigh. An owl calls once from a dark pine. The air cools. Stars feel close. For a few minutes no one talks about ounces or claims. They speak of home, of the road ahead, and of who will fetch water at dawn. The rush did not end on a single day. It faded in some valleys and flared in others. Strikes in Nevada and the northern ranges pulled men away. California learned to breathe at a steadier rate. Camps turned into towns, and some towns into cities. Roads that began as muddy tracks were graded, then planked, then paved. Children who had learned to walk beside sluice boxes grew into adults who served on juries, ran stores, built schools, and voted in elections. The old days became stories told on porches at dusk, not to boast, but to remember. It is useful to recall that the gold rush was never only about people bending over pans. It was also about a territory becoming a state, a port becoming a city, and a set of trails becoming a network of trade. It was about law catching up with life on the ground and about people learning to govern themselves in fast-changing places. It was about California's first peoples losing much and about the need, then and now, to honor their survival and rights. It was about the world growing a little smaller as ships, wagons, and wires pulled far places closer. Now let the story slow. Picture a quiet morning on a stream after the crowds have thinned. A miner who has decided to go home walks to the water one last time. He crouches, fills a pan, and makes the same steady motion he has made for months. He knows it is more habit than hope, but he wants to feel the weight again. A few fine flakes settle on the bottom. He smiles, sets the pan down, and washes his hands in the cold current. He dries them on his trousers, stands, and looks up at the hills. He thanks the place in a simple way and turns toward the path. On his way out he passes a garden beside a small house. Beans climb strings along a fence, quiet and sure. He passes a schoolhouse with an open window and hears a child practice a line from a reader. He passes a man mending a wheel and another painting a sign. These were not in his first plans. They are part of his memory now. He understands that the gold was real, but so were these other things. He carries both with him, a small pouch with bright metal and a larger store of steady ways that will serve him wherever he lives. If you let your mind rest there, on the road leading away, on the stream still talking over stones, on the town turning itself into a place to live, you will hold the heart of the gold rush. It was a rush toward bright metal, yes. It was also a slow building of homes, habits, and hopes. It was loud and quick at the edges and quiet and patient at the center. It gave some people riches and gave many people stories and skills they used for the rest of their lives. Let the hills soften in evening light. Let the last smoke from a cook fire drift and fade. Let the boots by the tent flap cool and stiffen. Tomorrow will come with its lists and choices. Some will dig. Some will sell. Some will head for a new valley. Some will board a ship for home. For tonight, the stream runs, the stars keep their places, and the simple wish that brought so many west, a little better life, rests beside those who sleep, close enough to steady their breathing and calm enough to let them dream.